Every morning, as the sun rises over Washington, D.C., it shines its light on one of the city's most visited memorials, bearing the names of more than 58,000 military members. Each made the ultimate sacrifice, serving their country in the Vietnam War. Every name on the wall has a story. Each name has a family. All names have a place they call home. James Robert Kalsu called Del City his home. Growing up in a military community around Tinker Air Force Base, where his father worked, Robert's character was rapidly being shaped by his family, school, and events that were taking place in his world. Even as an 8th grader, Robert may have been influenced by the words of President John F. Kennedy.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
As a standout on Del City's football team, a Friday night for Robert Kalsu in 1963 looked a lot like it does today. 2 Del City football teams, separated by more than 60 years of tradition, each with a goal of victory. Without realizing it, foundational character traits were being formed through the rigors of athletic competition.
You know, growing up in Del City in the basically early 60s and 70s, for a kid, and for me and for many others, it was all about sports.
You know, as a kid coming up in Del City, when all you're thinking about really is sports, you know, and he's 3 years older than you are, you see him as a guy that you want to emulate.
It was inspiring in so many ways to have somebody that you knew or watched on the field being honored in a way that hey, this guy made All-State. I mean, that's a big deal. He was a leader. He was outgoing. He was in some ways kind of bigger than life.
I miss him. I would enjoy him still being here so that I could always remind him that I could certainly beat him in basketball left-handed if I had to. But with respect to all other sports, he was really good. Baseball, golf, just to name a couple. But you know, football is the name of the game in Oklahoma. So you look at a Robert Kalsu from the perspective of a guy younger than him coming up in the community, and that's who you want to be like.
His talents on the football field caught the eye of renowned Sooners coach Bud Wilkinson, who recruited Robert to play at the University of Oklahoma. Despite playing for 4 different coaches in his 5-year collegiate career, Robert continued to improve his game and develop as a leader.
I got something I want to share. I thought was so relevant. In the press guide, the 1967 press guide, here's what the press guide said about Bob Kalsu. Oklahoma's best lineman. He can be one of the best in the Big 8. Kalsu, strong, quick, agile, experienced, excels at driving people off the line of scrimmage. If you hear that, the strong, quick, agile, experienced leader, that's everything you're looking for in an offensive line. He went on in 67 to make All Big 8. He also made All-American in 67.
In his senior year, All-American Robert Kalsu led a team that finished the season 10-1 and topped it off with an Orange Bowl win over Tennessee in January 1968. It was players and coaches of that team who knew team captain Kalsu the best.
I came here in 1966. I came on new staff with Jim McKenzie. Bob Kalsu was an offensive lineman, and he had already played. He was already a starter, and for the last coaching staff. I came in, and right away I had to coach the offensive line. Bob was very quiet, very reserved, more so than most players. He conducted himself as a gentleman, always on time. He did the right things, and I think that Bob was just more mature than most kids in school. And I think not that he's any older than they were, but he just handled himself a little bit different.
He always led by example, and it was just a comforting feeling for me, being a quarterback, knowing that Bob Kalsu was up in front of me, protecting me.
He was a natural-born leader. We respected Bob. If he told us to do something, we did it.
He was an outstanding player. He was a leader, gave great effort on the field. He demonstrated what a coach would like to see in a player, and it's obviously the other players saw what he did and helped motivate them to be better players. We ran Steve Owens and Ron Schatz behind those guys a lot. We were certainly a great running team, and Bob is a lot of part of that, because you don't run the ball unless you got an offensive line.
Bob was a no-nonsense, serious, beyond belief performer that expected, when we double-teamed, he expected a performance that matched his own effort. And of course, he was a great player who would be in the NFL.
Well, mostly when I was playing that year, I was next to Robert, and my blocks were usually a double team block, which means Robert would hit the guy right in the chest and drive him back, and all I had to do was kind of run along on the outside, kind of making sure that he didn't get outside of Robert's drive block, and it's pretty much a done deal when you double team with Robert Kalsu.
He was 6'3", 6'4". At that time, 250 pounds. He was a giant, during that period of time.
He was just a mammoth of a guy, and he might have been one of the best athletes on our team, but any time that we needed a tough yard or two, you could count on Bob.
Bobby Warback was our quarterback. Every time he called 72 there was a play, 72 to the strong side, I just smiled. I knew there was going to be a hole there, So I was hoping most of my plays were over Bob Kalsu.
I'd say that of all the players we had on our team, he was the baddest of the bad. You would not want to have to stand there and take Bob on, because he'd liable to hurt you.
So Bob was our captain when I was a sophomore, and like I said, we had so much respect for him, not only as a player, but as a human being. Great respect for Bob. When he talked, we listened.
He wasn't silly. Bob was a mature guy. He always was contained, but everybody looked up to him. They respected him tremendously. And he was always at the front of the line, and everybody lined up behind him, tried to emulate him.
We practiced with varsity, and finally they put me in the second team. I was tailback, so I ran off the right side, which was Bob's side, and I ran up the back of his legs. Linemen hate to have their backs run up their back of their legs, and he turned around and he picked me up by my shoulder pads, and he said, "Hey, I'm on your side." And I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Kalsu." But he taught me so much. But every time I carried the ball over Bob, there's a place to go. He told me, "You have to learn to run to daylight," and he taught me that.
Well, there was a particular drill called the board drill, where they took a 2x12 and they put it on the ground, and then the offensive player would get on one side and the defensive player would get on the other side, and the offensive player would drive block the defensive player off of the board. And one day we were at practice, and Coach Nystrom said that he didn't think that the practice squad players that we were going against were doing a good enough job. So he said, "I'll show you what I want." And he turned his hat around backwards, got down on the boards against every one of us. Bob Kalsu was the last player to go against Buck. He hit Buck right in the chest and knocked him up in the air, and then drove him right off the end of the board and planted him on the ground on his back. And you could hear this, "Ugh," when Bob stuck him on the ground. Years later, I saw Buck at a American Football Coaches Convention. I said, "Coach, remember that blocking drill that you took all of us players on when we were at OU?" And he goes, "Yeah, I sure do remember that." And I said, "Did you ever do that again?" He goes, "No, I never did that again. Kalsu left an imprint forever."
Football wasn't the only thing on Robert Kalsu's mind as the Sooners prepared to face Tennessee in the 1968 Orange Bowl.
So we found out that they're going to the Orange Bowl. Silly young people that we were, we thought, oh, gee, we could make a honeymoon out of that afterwards. And so we were planning on getting married before the Orange Bowl. And Coach Fairbanks got wind of it and said, that's not even going to happen.
After the Orange Bowl win, Robert and Jan were ready to launch a life together.
We had a wonderful wedding. 9 months after our wedding, Jill was born. He thought Jill was amazing. And when we'd go to church, he had to be the one carrying her up to Holy Communion. And people would say he holds her like a football.
Following his All-American senior season, he was an 8th-round draft pick of the Buffalo Bills. With a new wife and young family just beginning, Robert Kalsu was ready for pro football. Injury to a starting lineman gave Robert the unexpected opportunity to play. He delivered, being voted Buffalo Bills Team Rookie of the Year by coaches and teammates.
His career is very, very bright. He's going to be a great offensive lineman for years.
After just one successful season as a professional football player, his country called. He answered. As a devoted student in the University of Oklahoma's Army ROTC program, Robert Kalsu had made a commitment to serve in the Army, and he knew active duty service was just around the corner.
When Bob graduated and went through ROTC, and then he got drafted, by the Buffalo Bills, and he knew that active duty was just kind of looming right over his head. When it was going to happen, he had no idea, and then at the end of that season, here came the call.
He could have possibly gotten out of going to Vietnam because of playing football.
But that wasn't Bob Kalsu. Bob Kalsu, when he was committed to something, he did it.
He was a patriot. He was a guy that he signs up for something. He signed up for it because he wanted to do it. He was going to do it. And a lot of guys got deferment in pro football and got out of going to the service.
But Bob, he went to the Army because he felt like he owed it to them to do that. He had great honor, and he did. I think Bob did everything right.
His coaches for Buffalo I think they were trying to dissuade him from leaving because he made Rookie of the Year at Buffalo. And, Bob said, when I signed that commitment with the ROTC, I made a commitment to serve my 2 years, and that's what I'm going to do. And so we went to Fort Sill for a year, and then he's got his orders for Vietnam.
After completing artillery training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, Lieutenant Kalsu found himself assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. Robert was assigned to one of the hottest combat zones in the Vietnam War, Firebase Ripcord, an artillery post high in the mountains of central Vietnam.
And a lot of
work, a lot of hard, hot, dry work, carrying ammo back and forth from the military pad to the guns, shooting the guns all night a lot of times. Very physical, a lot of camaraderie, but a lot of fear.
He went to Ripcord, Firebase, was where he was stationed. And it didn't take long at all for the other troops to realize what kind of leader Bob was.
Bob was a gentleman in officer's clothing. He didn't scream, he didn't holler. If you did something wrong, he'd tell you about it. If you needed help, he would help you. Where officers just screamed and hollered and you were supposed to know what you were doing and don't be stupid. Bob wasn't that way. He didn't belittle anybody.
How would you say it? He was a soldier.
Yep.
He was the officer, but he was just a normal soldier. He walked around in the gun pits, helped out. If you were short on a gun crew, he was there firing that gun right along with you. You didn't see many officers do that.
He would sit down with you and eat C rations when it come time to eat. If you were humping ammo, he humped ammo for your gun section. He was one of the men. He wasn't a leader, he was one of us.
Yeah, if he had his shirt off, you know he was a lieutenant.
Yeah.
You were just one of us.
Yeah, I'd say for about maybe the first at least month, I didn't even know he was the commanding officer. He was just Bob. Just one of those guys you just naturally know this guy's in charge. This guy's a leader. You know, if you ever go into a crowd and you go, yeah, I admire that guy, or you can see that person just squared away. He was just that kind of guy.
Just a normal guy.
He supported us. You couldn't say a bad word about the man. I don't know of anybody on the fire base that said anything bad about Bob Kalsu. He was loved and respected by everybody. And that's why he got things done. Because when you lead by example, people will follow you.
He was something. He did his job excellently. He looked for, he always helped guys, would stop and talk to him to see how they're doing. And that was rare because some lieutenants I served under just didn't do that.
I think that whole battalion, our battery, they would have followed him anywhere. We would have followed him.
And it was like when the helicopters would come in and drop their ammunition off at the base of the mountain, he and all of his men would go down to the base and grab the ammunition and bring it up to the top of the mountain. And Bob, being as competitive as he was, he would grab the biggest one. It was like 96 pounds, and he'd throw it over his shoulder and hump it up the mountain. And he had a friend of his that was about the same size as Bob was, from Arkansas, and he was about as competitive as Bob was, and he would do the same thing. He didn't want Bob to outdo him. And so Bob would come back and he'd get two of them, one on each shoulder, and hump it back up the mountain. And I could hear him laughing, that high little laugh of his all the way up the mountain. And wasn't anybody any more competitive than Bob was.
He would be right there doing everything with us. My hooch mate was David Johnson, also known as Big John. He was a big, hulky kind of guy, and they were both kind of into football and stuff a little bit. And they would have contests. So they'd actually sit there and have 200-pound rounds on each shoulder, and the third one at the back would be running up the hill to see who could get the most up to the places where we stored the ammo by the guns. And it was a lot of fun. You just, just one of those guys that you just think's, you're amazed that he did this stuff. We all tried to keep up with him, but not of all as good, but amazing stuff. Just always with fun, just having a good time. Saying, hey, let's go. Wasn't it? Oh, get this work done. Let's just have fun doing it. I think partly that went back to his team, football and that kind of spirit, because it's just like we're all on the same team, kind of, without saying that.
Lieutenant Kalsu courageously led his team through combat conditions of mounting intensity as they sought to defend Firebase Ripcord. Robert's role as a leader of men on the base continued to grow until July 21st, 1970.
It was just so I can't hardly explain that. It wasn't a numbness, but you did your job to the best you could. And then things just went worse and worse. All of a sudden, there's this real loud explosion. And the dust and the dirt covered the world, it looked like. And I was blown back, knocked down off my feet. I saw Lieutenant Kalsu laying on the ground, and he was dead. I looked over, and through the smoke, I seen Big John laying on the ground, and he was dead. And I went a little closer to Lieutenant Kalsu. And his uniform, like everybody's, was soaked in sweat and dirt. And I knew we had to get him up and get him out of there. But I heard this voice, somebody was saying, Renner, Renner. And I looked, it was Sergeant Beale. Smoke had been hit, and he was laying on the ground. So I helped him up and got him to the aid station. As I was helping him to the aid station, I said, Smoke, what are we going to do? Lieutenant Kalsu's been killed. And he said, Renner, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do.
I had to help carry my John down to the helicopter pad. And as we're carrying down, he said, well, you got to carry me. Here's your hooks, man. Okay, so I'm going. And his arm fell out, and I almost lost it. I mean, I'm a pretty brave kind of guy, but just realizing that the loss of a friend and a buddy, same thing with Bob, as if we took them both down at the same time. It's just very hard to deal with. Yeah. But I still deal with it now, too. Again, it was a little emotional as we're talking about it.
He was a squared away dude. He never treated anybody bad. We would, he'd ask me multiple times if I was okay. And he was a leader. He was a good guy. There's a lot of good guys on that hill. But all the other officers we got from then out, I couldn't hold a candle to Lieutenant Kalsu. He's just one of a kind.
What was your reaction when you learned that he had lost his life?
Shocked. I was playing for Detroit my rookie year. We just started training camp. Got the call. I couldn't believe it. Not Bob. Of course, the way it happened, too, he was getting ready to come home. And it was devastating to all of us who loved him and respect him.
Friend, leader, outstanding individual. Overall, just outstanding human being.
And a friend. He was a friend to everybody, and everybody was his friend over there. Everybody was very close in there. And I think he made it.
Yep.
He made us close. There was no arguments, no fighting, no nothing.
Yeah, you just had that personality you're drawn to.
Yeah.
You just know you're gonna somebody you can hang out with or be be a friend for forever. And now he's gone.
It was pretty devastating for all of us that knew Bob and played with Bob and respected Bob, and he created a legend forever, for sure.
The most dramatic moment, I'm gonna get emotional about this, I'd have near cry myself, is at his service, his funeral. Service is over, and we're all at the graveside. And we're all going to our cars, drive away from the cemetery. and his father stayed out there. I think his father's name was Frank, and I watched Frank, and I watched him from the car, and as soon as they started to lower his body in the grave, Frank ran and jumped on the coffin, laid on the coffin as it went down, and I thought that I'd never seen anything like that before, and I was really taken by it. It was an emotional memory to me about what a son means to a father, and it was demonstrated then to me.
But we had his funeral, and and then it was the children and me from then on. Jill's a teacher now, teaching 3rd grade with 5 beautiful children, and Bob's an aircraft law attorney with his 4 children, and they both have wonderful spouses. And I'm thank God, because it's all through God that our lives have been led.
If you wanted to have a friend that was always there for you, that was Bob.
When Robert Kalsu interacted with another person, the message is, you matter and I care. And that's how he was as a human being. That's what makes having known him so magical in a way.
As a junior in high school, when he passed away, like I said, all I knew was his performance athletically and how he did and how I admired that. And wow, look what he accomplished. He's a Del City guy. Like I said, he's made All-State. He went to OU. He was a starter at OU. He was a 3-year starter. He was All-Conference. He was All-American. He played in the NFL. Wow. It's an impressive resume. But it's even more than that. And there's a lot of people that admire and loved Robert Kalsu and do to this very day. And I'm one of those, even though I never met him.
I would say, to kind of condense it real quickly here, I would say that, the Almighty put a lot of goodness and greatness in Robert Kalsu. And then he turned him loose on the rest of us to share that goodness and greatness. And boy, he did.
People all over America have honored the name of Robert Kalsu. From Buffalo to the 101st Screaming Eagles Airborne Division in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to the University of Oklahoma, to an outpost of the Middle East, to numerous sites in Del City, including the stadium that has carried his name since 1977. Reality of war silenced his voice, but launched a legacy of uncommon character. His name has been honored. We now choose to honor his story.
He's a hero. He's a patriot. He's, the embodiment of the values that we hold in high regard in this country.
I said, this is a story unlike any story in the history of our country. It represents you. It represents the indomitable American fighting spirit. And it represents a farm kid from Del City, Oklahoma, who believed that character matters and character counts. Because it's not a story about numbers and touchdowns and home runs and wins and losses. It's a story about character. The character and fabric of America as you know it. Honor, courage, commitment. They mean something to you and to me. And to Bob Kalsu, it's how he lived.
Every name on the Vietnam Memorial Wall has a story and a place they call home. Robert Kalsu's home will now tell his story with pride. Del City community leaders, Mid-Del school officials, former coaches, battle buddies, friends, and family have united to accept the task of honoring Robert's life and his legacy with a monument inside the front gate of the stadium that bears his name. May the values he embraced while living and all that his life reflected serve to inspire everyone who hears his story.